You have 14 days to tear it down or the board will proceed with formal action. That's the sentence that started all of this. It wasn't screamed, it wasn't threatened. It was delivered with a smirk by a woman in heels who's never held a flashlight during a blackout, let alone helped a neighbor in a flood. Just a folded notice slipped under my door with the kind of cold certainty that assumes I'd roll over like everyone else had. I'm Cal Becker, retired firefighter, full-time grandfather. I built that garage with my own hands 10 years ago, not just to park tools or store bikes. I built it after I lost my wife Dana during the South Creek flood. Power was out, roads blocked, and the whole town was waiting on emergency crews that came too late for us. She died because no one was ready. I swore I wouldn't let that happen again. Before we go further, let me know where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe if you've ever had to fight for something everyone else thought was just a building, a fence, or a tree. Because this isn't just about code violations. This is about what happens when rules get used like weapons, and when a garage turns out to be the one thing standing between a family and chaos. I know how this sounds. It's easy to brush this off as just another HOA story, but you weren't there when I opened that garage during last winter's blackout and half the street showed up with blankets and flashlights asking if I still had the generator running, or when I passed out hot coffee from the propane stove and saw tears in my neighbor Jerry's eyes because his daughter had been sleeping in a freezing car. That garage meant something, still does. Every plank of wood I nailed down, every box of emergency supplies, every gallon of water, it all came from Dana's plan. She had this old yellow notepad she called her what-if list. What if the roads flood again? What if cell towers go down? What if help doesn't come? She'd scribble down ideas during commercial breaks, late at night, whenever something on the news made her anxious. When she passed, I found the notepad tucked in her cookbook drawer. I couldn't read the whole thing at once. It felt like she was still speaking to me, giving me instructions from the other side. But that list became the blueprint for the garage. Her handwriting still sits under the laminated map taped to the wall above the workbench. That map? That's the one she marked with 3 red stars. Our house, the nearest fire station, and the creek that overflowed. Every time I look at it, I remember what she told me after the first flood scare. If we can help just one neighbor when it counts, then it was worth it. So when the HOA president, Nadine Whitlow, strutted up my driveway 2 weeks ago in her pastel blazer and handed me that folded notice, I didn't just see paper. I saw someone trying to erase my wife's last wish. Someone who didn't understand what it meant to be ready. Really ready. "I'm sorry, Mr. Becker," she said, smug as ever. "The structure violates current zoning guidelines. It doesn't matter why it's there." That's when I knew this wasn't going to be a misunderstanding. This was war. I asked her one question before she turned away. "Did you even read what it's for?" She paused. Her lips twitched into something like a smile. "It doesn't matter. It's illegal." Since then, the letters haven't stopped. First, a $150 0-cent fine, then a second warning with legal jargon stacked taller than my toolbox. I've lived here 24 years, helped raise 3 kids, put out house fires in this very neighborhood, and now I'm being told the safest place on this block is a code violation? Here's what Nadine doesn't know. I'm not the man who lets go easy. I've faced down collapsing buildings and burning rooftops. A paperwork bully doesn't scare me. If she wants a fight, I've got Dana's map, a garage full of evidence, and neighbors who remember who kept the lights on when the grid failed. This isn't about a shed, it's about legacy, about honor, about not letting the people who shout rules the loudest get away with rewriting what matters. She wants that garage gone? She'll have to burn it down herself. I didn't sleep much after that last letter. Not out of fear. No, it was something closer to insult. Like someone had spit on a headstone and expected me to thank them for the advice. Dana's map hung on the pegboard above the workbench, her red stars still bold against the faded blue. I stared at it in the dark, arms folded, wondering if she ever imagined that her what-if plan would be treated like contraband. 3 days after Nadine's visit, I got the first notice of non-compliance. It was folded neatly in a plastic sleeve, zip-tied to my front gate like a reward ribbon at a dog show. Violation 1, unapproved structural addition. Violation 2, visual disruption to neighborhood aesthetic. Violation 3, use of premises for unauthorized purpose. I laughed, then I read it again, then I stopped laughing. You'd think I'd added a helipad and nightclub instead of a reinforced shelter with fireproof insulation and a storm-rated steel roof. That afternoon, I walked into the HOA's community office, a repurposed tool shed behind the tennis court. Inside, it smelled like laminate and power trips. Nadine sat at the desk, flanked by her clipboard and a cup that read Boss Lady. "Mr. Becker," she said without looking up, "I assume this is about the citations?" "You assume right," I replied. "Would have been nice to get a conversation before the penalties." She looked up. Her eyes were hard, like polished glass. "The board operates under updated codes. That garage was never formally reviewed." I set a photo down on the table. It was from last December 10. Neighbors gathered in the garage, bundled in jackets, sipping coffee from mismatched mugs. A propane heater glowed in the corner, my granddaughter curled up in a sleeping bag. "This structure saved lives during the blackout," I said. "That has to mean something." Nadine slid the photo back across the table without even glancing at it. "Feelings aren't part of the code book, Mr. Becker. Facts are." "No," I said quietly. "Facts built that garage. You're just hiding behind paperwork." She leaned back. "The sooner you remove it, the fewer penalties you'll face." I left without another word. I'd learned that silence, when properly timed, can feel louder than shouting. The fines started to stack. $150, 0 cents. Then $300, 0 cents. By the second week, it totaled $750, 0 cents, and a second warning that failure to comply would result in escalated legal proceedings. That phrase, it has a weight to it, doesn't it? Like they're rolling a boulder up a hill and hoping you get crushed beneath it. My neighbor Jerry dropped by with a six-pack and a furrowed brow. "Cal," he said, "they're coming after you harder than they did the Martinez family, and all they did was repaint their shutters beige." I nodded. "That's because the garage works, Jerry. That's what scares them." He opened a beer and scanned the shelves lined with first aid kits and bottled water. "You ever think about going public, telling the town?" "Too early," I said. "You don't show your hand to someone who deals the deck." The next morning, someone had spray-painted "Mamoon Eyesore" on my fence. Now, I don't jump to conclusions, but Nadine's son is the only kid in this subdivision with a paintball gun and a grudge. I filed a report. Nothing came of it. Later that week, I got a second citation. This time for improper curbside waste disposal. The trash can had been tipped slightly to the left of the driveway. This was no longer about rules. This was about control. I started keeping a log, times, dates, incidents, who said what. I mounted a motion camera on the garage's corner beam and set up a folder labeled Defense. Because what they didn't know was that I'd fought fires with less warning than this. I'd crawled under roofs with minutes left before collapse. I'd dragged teenagers out of wrecked sedans while engines hissed behind me. If Nadine wanted a war of attrition, she was in for a surprise. But still, I couldn't shake the way she'd said, feelings aren't part of the code book. Maybe not, but they are part of the neighborhood, and people were watching, closer than she realized. By the end of that week, my driveway looked like a printer exploded. Another notice, this time citing unsightly curb appeal. I laughed when I read that one. The irony of a life-saving structure being labeled an eyesore by people who decorate with plastic flamingos and artificial turf wasn't lost on me. But what caught my attention wasn't the paper. It was the person who left it. She didn't knock. She didn't make eye contact either, just approached with slow steps, clipped the notice to my mailbox, then froze for a second too long, like something in her conscience tugged against the motion. Jenna Morales, HOA treasurer, bookkeeper for the board, but also the neighbor who once brought us a lemon pie after Dana passed. We hadn't spoken much since, not beyond casual waves and how's the weather chats, but I remembered how her hands trembled back then, just like they did now. "Morning," I said, stepping onto the porch. She startled, nearly dropping the clipboard. "Oh, Cal, I didn't see you." She pulled the strap of her purse tighter, eyes darting toward the sidewalk. "You all right?" I asked. She nodded too quickly, just making my rounds. "Do they always make you do the dirty work?" She hesitated, her lips parted slightly, like she was going to answer, but the words never came. Instead, she shifted her weight and turned away. I watched her walk off, her steps uneven, her free hand clenched in a fist. That wasn't guilt. That was someone stuck between a rock and a bulldozer. Inside, I made coffee and stared out the window at the garage. For a moment, I saw it the way Dana did, not as a building, but as a promise, a safeguard, a quiet act of rebellion against unpreparedness. Later that day, I attended the HOA meeting. I wanted to look them in the eye. The room was small, cheap wood panels, plastic chairs, and a single folding table where Nadine sat flanked by 3 other board members. Jenna sat at the far end, pencil in hand, scribbling minutes. Her eyes never met mine. "We're moving forward with official enforcement," Nadine said to the group. "Mr. Becker's structure remains unapproved and unresolved. We've exhausted leniency." I raised my hand. "You may speak," she said, not even looking up. "Has anyone here bothered to inspect the garage yourselves? Or are we just going off hearsay and bylaws written before half the neighborhood existed?" "That structure violates visual standards and zoning," she snapped. "Its function is irrelevant." Jenna's pencil slowed, then stopped. "You ever seen it during an outage, Nadine?" I asked. "Or during last winter's freeze?" "I don't need to," she said flatly. "I think you do. I think if you stepped foot in there, you'd see what it actually is." Jenna shifted in her seat. Her eyes flicked to me, briefly, then returned to the legal pad. I caught it. That silent flicker of something. Doubt? Regret? Or maybe memory. After the meeting, she lingered by the table while the others left. I didn't move. I just stood there as she slowly gathered her notes. "You're not wrong, Cal," she said quietly, eyes still down. "But right doesn't always win here." I walked closer. "You knew Dana. You know what this place means." She nodded once. "That's what makes this harder." Then she left. No storm, no yelling, no fireworks, just a woman caught in the crossfire, watching someone else get punished for doing the right thing and biting her tongue to survive. That night I looked through Dana's notepad again. There was an entry I hadn't noticed before, dated a year before she died. "They'll try to stop you. Not because it's wrong, but because it makes them look like they weren't ready. Build it anyway." I closed the book and exhaled. Have you ever seen someone stay silent when they knew the truth? Or been that person yourself? Drop a comment below, tell me where you're watching from, and if you've ever witnessed something that made you want to finally speak up, you're not alone. The first siren came at 3:42 a.m. I was already awake, sitting by the kitchen window with Dana's notepad on the table, open to that final line. Build it anyway. The rain started as a whisper, then turned into something heavier, something you feel in your spine before it echoes off the roof. By 4:00 the wind had picked up, and a transformer blew down the block. The streetlights flickered once, then gave up. Darkness swallowed the neighborhood. And just like last winter, the calls started. First from Jerry, "Cal, your garage, can we bring Maddie? She's freaking out." Then Mrs. Avery across the road. "My husband's oxygen machine, it's blinking." Then 2 more I didn't recognize, parents with a newborn, someone with a diabetic teen. All of them knew where to go, even if the HOA didn't. I lit the garage's backup lights and unchained the double doors. Inside, everything was ready, thanks to Dana's checklist. Flashlights, backup batteries, water, blankets, space heaters, a hand crank radio, everything organized in labeled bins. I unlocked the emergency cot rack and powered up the generator. By 4:30 a.m., 6 families had already arrived. The air inside the garage was warm, steady, bright. Outside, chaos. Wind curling around trash bins, trees bending, a siren in the far distance. And in the middle of all that, a structure the HOA had deemed a hazard was quietly doing what the entire neighborhood needed. Jenna showed up an hour later, no clipboard this time. She knocked once before stepping in, soaked and breathless. "I'm not here officially," she said, eyes scanning the room. I needed to see for myself." Her gaze caught on the emergency cot where Jerry's daughter was sleeping, bundled in a wool blanket. She said nothing, but her lips parted slightly, like she wanted to. I didn't press her. Then came the inevitable. "Nadine." She pulled up in her white Lexus, high beams on, umbrella snapping in the wind like some parody of authority. She didn't even enter, just stood at the edge of the driveway, arms folded, watching as neighbors flowed in and out of the garage like it was a Red Cross center. "Mr. Becker," she called, voice loud over the rain. This is not a sanctioned shelter." "No, it's just a working one," I replied. Her jaw clenched. "You are violating HOA regulations." "And you're violating basic decency," I said, stepping outside. "Do you see what's happening? People need help, and this building, this garage you hate so much, is the only place on this street with power and supplies. You've put the board in a difficult position." "The board," I said slowly, "isn't standing out here with wet shoes and scared kids." She opened her mouth, but a flash of lightning cracked the sky, silencing everything. For a split second, the whole neighborhood lit up, and in that moment, Nadine looked small, just another person clinging to the illusion of control. "I'm filing an injunction," she muttered, turning back toward her car. "You'll be hearing from us." She didn't wait for a response, just drove off into the dark. Inside, Jenna pulled a towel from the supplies and handed it to a shivering boy. "Do you think they'll shut it down?" she asked, quietly. I looked at Dana's map on the far wall. The red stars still burned under the emergency lights. Not without a fight. The rest of the night passed in flickers of light and low voices. People helping each other, neighbors I hadn't spoken to in years offering soup packets, spare socks, stories to distract the kids. By morning, the wind had died down, but the power hadn't returned. The neighborhood emerged into gray silence. But inside the garage, there was coffee, heat, and calm. The place Nadine called a violation had turned into the only functioning command post in 3 blocks. And for the first time since all this began, I felt something shift. Not just in the people, but in the story itself. They could call it illegal all they wanted. But the storm had shown them what the rule book never would. The storm left as fast as it arrived, like it had only come to make a point. By morning, the street buzzed with neighbors sharing flashlights and thermoses, some still wrapped in blankets from the night in my garage. Jenna had slipped out before sunrise. No words, just a soft look as she closed the door gently behind her. I didn't need her to say anything. Her silence had already spoken louder than Nadine's paperwork ever could. But I knew something else had to give. I couldn't rely on sympathy and blankets forever. If Nadine was threatening legal action, I needed something solid. Something older than her rules and louder than her title. So I went down to the basement. Not the finished part. The unfinished side. Concrete floor, old nails in the beams, and a single yellow pull string for light that hummed when it flickered on. I hadn't been down there in months. Maybe longer. The air smelled like dust and time. I started moving boxes, old camping gear, Dana's canning jars. One box marked Thanksgiving had a faded pine cone wreath and a stack of mismatched plastic plates. Then, behind a stack of storm shutters, I saw it. A small, rusted metal lockbox. I recognized it instantly. Dana's dad had given it to us the year we moved in, said it was just in case the town got funny with the paperwork. Back then I laughed. Now, I gripped the handle like it might bite. I carried it upstairs, set it on the workbench in the garage, and found the old key tucked in Dana's recipe tin, right behind her scribbled cornbread notes. The click echoed louder than it should have. Inside were documents, a manila folder labeled Zoning, Pre-HOA, hand-dressed to Dana from a man named Arthur Keene. I flipped through the papers, scans of land surveys, original property plats. A letter from Arthur, dated 1998. Dana. Attached is everything we discussed. Your parcel sits on the former Civic Zone perimeter, listed as a designated emergency asset until the 2001 charter was rewritten. If they ever come knocking, you've got history on your side. Don't let them bury it, Arthur. I didn't know who Arthur Keene was, but I knew that line, designated emergency asset, might just be the key I needed. And then there was something else. A photo. Dana standing with Arthur and 2 other men in front of a city planning office. She's holding up a rough sketch of our lot with a red circle drawn on the corner, right where the garage now stands. I sat back, heart thudding in a way no storm had managed. They tried to erase it, but Dana had built this plan into the bones of the neighborhood before any of these HOA folks even knew the block existed. She had seen them coming. That night, I scanned every document, labeled each file, and backed them up 3 ways. I printed copies, stored the originals in a fireproof bag, and started a new folder on my desktop titled Legacy Defense. It felt like finding a forgotten weapon in an old war bunker, not just to fight, but to prove what this garage had always been, not a nuisance, not a rebellion, a contingency. Jerry stopped by just after dusk, hands in his pockets, eyes weary but curious. "You're still at it," he said, watching the printer spit out Dana's old map with the red circle on it. "I think I just found our insurance policy," I said. "The garage? It wasn't just a structure. It was part of the original zoning plan, before the HOA rewrote history." He leaned in. "You serious?" I held up the photo. "Dead serious. This thing was meant to be here, and I've got signatures to prove it." Jerry exhaled. "Well, then maybe it's time the board got reminded that memory lasts longer than power." I nodded. It was more than just a blueprint. It was proof that Dana hadn't just planned for storms, she'd planned for the aftermath too. Jerry left just after sunset. He didn't say much more, but he didn't have to. Sometimes a neighbor's silence carries more weight than an HOA's entire rulebook. I spent that evening trying to track down Arthur Keene. His name wasn't common, which helped. A few hours of searching local archives and old zoning committees turned up something solid. Arthur had been the town's senior planning advisor back in the late 90s, the same years Dana was meeting with him, the same years the neighborhood was still under city governance, not HOA rule. Then I hit gold. An old article in a scanned city newsletter titled "Retirement of a Civic Giant. Arthur Keene Steps Down." The piece mentioned his love for legacy planning, civic utility spaces, and working with local families to maintain continuity between private use and public safety. Beneath the article was an address, an assisted living home about 40 minutes away. I didn't wait. The next morning, I drove out before dawn. The place was quiet, with soft jazz playing in the lobby and the scent of fresh oatmeal hanging in the air. A nurse named Melanie led me to room 213, her tone warm but hesitant. "He's sharp, just not fast," she said, "and he doesn't like small talk." Perfect. Arthur sat in a worn recliner facing the window, wrapped in a plaid blanket, thin frame, white hair, and eyes that scanned like they were still measuring walls for potential exits. "You're Cal Becker?" he asked without introduction. I nodded. "Dana's husband." He blinked once, then twice. "Well, I'll be damned," he said, sitting up a little straighter. "She always said you'd come knocking after the wrong person picked a fight." I'd handed him the photo, the one from the box. His hand hovered over it, trembling just slightly before resting on the image. "She was the smartest woman I ever worked with," he muttered. "Knew the codes better than half my staff. Fought for that civic overlay like it was a cornerstone, and she was right to." "They're trying to shut down the garage," I said, "calling it non-compliant, illegal." He smirked. "That garage sits on a former emergency designation. Before the HOA, your land was tagged for auxiliary relief development in case of power loss, storm overflow, or civil disruption." "That language still hold up?" I asked. Arthur looked me dead in the eye. "If you have that document I sent her, and you do, or you wouldn't be here, it holds up just fine." He paused. "Thing is, the current board probably doesn't even know this history. They're playing with half the cards and assuming no one remembers the rules." He motioned to a bookshelf beside his recliner. "Top left, black binder. I kept a copy of every city zone revision I ever filed. Call it insurance." Inside was a thick binder with yellowed tabs and a worn label, Zone 199120003. Arthur helped me find the page, Section 12.4D, highlighted in faded orange. It listed our street, my lot, the designation code, E2R Emergency Residential Reinforcement Zone. There it was, in black and white, city sealed, signed, and dated. "I don't know if the new town council even has this in their digital archives," Arthur said, "but you've got the hard proof. That garage isn't just legal, it's legacy." Before I left, he tapped the photo once more. "She never did things halfway," he added. "She made sure someone would outlast the paper pushers." I drove home with the binder on the passenger seat, Dana's map sitting beside it. The garage came into view just past the oak tree she planted, the same one she used to sit under while scribbling notes in that yellow notepad. Everything she'd warned me about, every red star, every fallback plan was falling into place. Back inside, I scanned every page of the binder, made copies, and stored one in the fireproof lockbox. Then I pinned a new copy of the zoning map on the garage wall, right next to Dana's. 2 maps, 2 timelines, 1 truth. They'd tried to erase history, but Dana buried it deep enough to grow roots. Ever find something from the past that changed everything in the present? A document, a photo, a memory? Drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from, because sometimes the answers are buried deep, but they were never lost. The copy of Dana's map and Arthur's zoning document hung side by side on the garage wall like war flags. But I knew paper alone wouldn't stop Nadine. People like her don't fold under facts. They double down, especially when they feel cornered. So I didn't just prepare, I laid the groundwork for a counterattack. What I didn't expect was for help to walk through my front door. It was late afternoon, quiet, overcast. I was reviewing the digitized zoning code line by line when there was a knock. Jenna stood there, out of breath, eyes darting over her shoulder. "Can I come in?" she asked, her voice thinner than usual. I nodded and stepped aside. She stepped over the threshold like it might bite her. Her hands shook slightly as she slid a flash drive across my dining table. "What's this?" I asked. She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she moved to the window and peeked through the blinds. Then, turning back to me, she said, "It's the past 6 months of HOA board recordings. Every meeting, every side call Nadine forced us to log off the record." I blinked. "Why now?" Her jaw tensed. "Because last night she said she was going to have your power shut off if you didn't comply." I felt my fists curl. She doesn't have that authority. "She thinks she does," Jenna said, and no one's stopping her. The others just sit there, nodding. I've watched her lie, twist minutes, delete comments. I've tried to push back quietly, but quiet isn't working anymore. I loaded the drive into my laptop. The files were organized by date, clean audio clips labeled meticulously. Jenna pulled a folded note from her purse and slid it across the table too. "She's planning to vote you into forced non-compliance next week. It's a clause she found buried in the 2009 revision, something about habitual defiance. If she wins the vote, she can move forward with legal seizure of property improvements." "She wants to bulldoze the garage," I said. "She wants to humiliate you," Jenna replied. "This is personal now. It always was." We listened together. One clip in particular sent a cold wave down my spine. It was Nadine, casual and cruel. "Let him dig in. The deeper they dig, the better they fall when we yank the ground out. I want that garage turned back into grass. I don't care if it saves puppies. It's a blot on our image." Jenna flinched. "That was 2 weeks ago. No one objected." I leaned back, staring at the ceiling. Then I stood, walked into the garage and returned with the zoning binder and Dana's map. "You ready to make this public?" I asked. She hesitated, then nodded. We drove to the town clerk's office and filed a formal notice to appear before the upcoming open HOA hearing. I attached scanned evidence of the zoning designation, Arthur Keene's notarized statement, which he insisted I take before I left, and a printed transcript of Nadine's recording. That night, I added one more file to the folder, a letter from the planning department, verifying that my garage was built on a zone that had never been officially overturned or rezoned. We were armed now. Not with outrage, with truth. Jenna stayed a little longer after we returned. We sat in the garage, now quiet again, blankets folded, cots stacked, lights dimmed. "You think it'll work?" she asked. "I think they've been counting on no one fighting back for a long time," I said, "and you just flipped the script." She smiled, small but real. Before she left, she stopped at the map and touched the red star Dana had drawn. "She was right," Jenna whispered. "We needed this." And with that, she was gone. But the lines had been drawn. And this time, I wasn't waiting for their next move. Jenna's words were still echoing in my mind as I stood in the garage that night. "This is personal now. It always was." She was right. They weren't just trying to tear down a structure. They were trying to erase what it stood for. Dana's work, our plan, the nights we spent figuring out where each fire extinguisher would go. This wasn't just about rules anymore. It was about rewriting a narrative, and I wasn't going to let them do it. By morning, I had a plan. Not a protest, not a tantrum, a methodical, step-by-step strategy. It started with the petition. I printed copies of the original zoning documents Arthur gave me, Dana's handwritten plans, and the designation code that proved the garage had once been part of a civil emergency overlay. Then I walked the block. I didn't pitch it emotionally, I pitched it like an architect. This isn't just a building, I told each neighbor. It's a fallback, you've seen it work, now we make it official. By noon, I had over 20 signatures. Jerry even walked 2 blocks with me to collect more. Next, I called Reed Daly, a local reporter who used to cover fires with me back in the day. He owed me a favor. "You serious?" he asked over the phone. "You built a working emergency shelter and they want to knock it down?" Serious as the flood that killed our generator in 9. He showed up that evening with a camera crew. I walked him through the garage, flipping switches, opening storage bins, showing him the generator hookup, the emergency cot rack. I handed him a printout of the HOA recording Jenna had given me. The quote was highlighted in yellow. "I don't care if it saves puppies, Nadine Whitlow." He looked up from the page. "We'll run it this week." That gave me momentum, but I needed more than public opinion. I needed legal ground. So I called Marlene Takahashi, the town's emergency services coordinator. She'd worked with Dana years ago on a community CPR program. She remembered her. I sent her the scanned zoning files, the shelter plans, and Arthur Keene's statement. Her reply came in less than 2 hours. "Your property was historically marked as E2R. That's an emergency residential reinforcement zone. Under pre-AOA jurisdiction, I can issue a temporary stay while the board reviews your hearing appeal." That meant one thing: Nadine couldn't bulldoze the garage, not yet. The pause gave me just enough room to move. Back in the garage, I pinned the documents beside Dana's map. Petition signatures. Zoning maps. Arthur's original survey. Marlene's temporary designation letter. And that quote from Nadine, in bold print. I didn't have to yell. The wall spoke louder than any speech could. That night, Jenna returned, quieter than usual but different. Her shoulders weren't slouched, her voice didn't wobble. "I've got more signatures," she said, handing me a fresh sheet. "Even Mrs. Reynolds signed, and she once fined me for planting unapproved tulips." I laughed, a short one. "Maybe the tide's turning." She looked around the garage. "You ever think she's scared?" "Of what?" "That you built something no one else did, that you proved them unnecessary." I thought about it. Maybe she was right. Maybe Nadine didn't fear the garage because it broke rules, but because it reminded people of who actually stepped up when things went wrong. Before she left, Jenna picked up the red marker and added one line under Dana's map. "Still here, still needed." I looked at that for a long time after she was gone. Then I went back to my files, labeled each document with timestamps, dates, author names, built a binder, burned a backup copy to USB, printed everything twice. The hearing was in 2 days. And this time, I wasn't just walking in with hope. I was walking in with evidence and a whole neighborhood behind me. The garage wall looked like a war map now. Documents, signatures, official seals, and Dana's original sketch at the center like a compass pointing true. For a moment, I let myself believe we'd already won. That illusion didn't last long. The next morning, I received a certified envelope, hand-delivered, not mailed. That was Nadine's style. No detail too petty when intimidation was the goal. Inside, a formal notice from the HOA's legal counsel citing a pattern of hostile defiance, along with an accusation that I had weaponized community influence against elected leadership. It warned of immediate steps toward legal enforcement, including a petition for temporary property restriction. In plain English, she was trying to freeze my rights, not just to use the garage, but to speak about it. I handed the notice to Jerry, who read it and let out a low whistle. "She's throwing the whole book now." "No," I said, "she's writing a new one." That evening, at the edge of dusk, I spotted her across the street. Nadine stood in her driveway, cell phone pressed to her ear, watching me like she was measuring the wind before a storm. I didn't wave, neither did she. The next day, Reed Daly's story ran. Local man builds emergency shelter. HOA tries to tear it down. It spread fast. On Facebook, in the local paper, even a radio segment. The photo showed me standing in front of the garage, arms crossed, next to a quote from the zoning ordinance and Jenna's line under Dana's map. "Still here. Still needed." By noon, the neighborhood group chat exploded. Some people defended Nadine. Rules are rules, if everyone did whatever they wanted. But most were tired. Tired of the threats. Tired of the noise. Tired of living under the illusion that a boardroom full of name tags had more authority than common sense. That night she snapped. It started with a surprise visit. Nadine and 2 board members, clipboards in hand, knocking not on my door but my neighbor's. One by one, they went house to house, asking if anyone had felt pressured into signing my petition. One resident told her to leave. Another asked if she was threatening them. She kept going. When she finally reached my house, she didn't knock. She stood at the edge of the driveway and called out, "Mr. Becker, this is your last warning. Cease the unauthorized distribution of board materials and stop misleading the public." I walked out, holding the petition and a copy of the zoning document in each hand. "Tell me what's misleading, Nadine," I said. "Was it the town's emergency designation, the notarized statement from the original city planner, or your own quote about puppies not mattering?" Her nostrils flared. "This has gone too far." "No," I said calmly, "this has gone exactly where it needed to." Her voice cracked, just barely. "You're turning the community against the board." "No," I said again, "you did that. I'm just letting people see it." The next day, I got word she'd called an emergency board session, closed door, no minutes released. Jenna texted me afterward. "She tried to push a vote to ban you from all future meetings. One board member abstained. It didn't pass." I stared at that message for a long time. She was unraveling. And in trying to silence me, she was only making my voice louder. That night, I added one more thing to the garage wall, a photo of the garage from the news article, printed out and tacked beside Dana's original plans. Past and present, proof and legacy. Then I sat back, folded my arms, and waited. Because the hearing was tomorrow. And Nadine had no idea I was bringing the whole story with me. By the time the petition hit 43 signatures, I thought the worst might be behind me. The garage was no longer just mine. It had become a neighborhood symbol. Jenna's red marker note still stood bold on the map, still here, still needed. But the one thing I underestimated was how cornered people like Nadine behave when their grip starts slipping. The escalation came fast. First, an official-looking envelope appeared on my doorstep, hand-delivered, no postage, HOA letterhead, legalese thicker than tar. The accusation? Malicious community disruption and unauthorized political organizing. Political. And was a new one. Buried in the text was the threat of an emergency board motion to temporarily suspend homeowner privileges pending further review. Translation? They were trying to cut off my access to speak at the hearing. But Nadine didn't stop at paperwork. By noon, she'd sent out an email blast to the entire HOA listserv. Due to recent misinformation circulated regarding zoning designations and the board's duties, we remind residents not to be misled by emotionally charged rhetoric or non-verified documents. She never mentioned my name. She didn't have to. Then came the knock. 3 members of the board, including Nadine, were walking the neighborhood, clipboard patrol. One neighbor told me she asked whether anyone had been pressured or manipulated into signing my petition. Another said she warned them about unforeseen consequences of siding against leadership. It wasn't outreach. It was a cleanup mission. And then they came to me. Nadine didn't walk up the driveway. She stopped at the sidewalk like she was afraid the garage would bite her. "Mr. Becker," she called out, voice clipped and performative, "we're reminding residents to refrain from spreading unofficial interpretations of outdated documents." I stepped out onto the porch, holding a copy of the 1998 zoning map and Arthur Keene's notarized letter. "You mean these unofficial documents, the ones signed by the town's own planner?" She blinked, tight smile straining. "Zoning evolves. Community standards evolve. Safety doesn't," I said. That's when Jenna stepped out from behind me. She'd come over to help organize files, but clearly hadn't expected to walk into this ambush. Nadine stiffened. "Ms. Morales, you're still expected at tonight's special session." Jenna met her gaze evenly. "Good. I've got a few things to bring up." The pause between them lasted all of 3 seconds, but the tension in the air felt like wire drawn tight. When they left, Jenna and I went back into the garage. She was quiet for a long time. "Think she's cracking," she finally said. "She's doubling down," I replied. "That's not the same as breaking." Still, Nadine's tactics had rattled a few neighbors. I got 3 texts that evening from folks asking to withdraw their names from the petition, worried about possible violations. Fear worked. That's why she used it. But it also exposed something. She knew she was losing. Later that night, as the sun dropped and the porch light buzzed on, I sat in the garage going over every document one more time. My fingers ran across Dana's notepad, the old cover worn smooth from use. I flipped to a page I hadn't seen in a while. It wasn't part of the shelter plan, just a line she wrote in the margin once. "May only bark loud when they know they've already lost the fight." I smiled at that. She always had a way of boiling it down. The final hearing was less than 24 hours away. Nadine thought she could freeze me out with threats and fine print. But the truth had already spread. The article, the zoning proof, the emergency coordinator's statement, they were facts. And no vote could make facts disappear. So I printed one more photo, a shot of the garage lit during the last blackout, families inside, steam rising from mugs, kids sleeping safe. I taped it to the center of the garage wall under Dana's map. The caption I wrote in red: "This is what they call illegal." The hearing was less than 12 hours away. My evidence was stacked, labeled, and ready. The garage, now part shelter, part war room, glowed under soft lantern light as I sat with Dana's map spread out on the table. My thumb traced the red star she'd drawn on our property like a signature carved into time. Then the power cut out. Again. No warning, no flicker, just sudden blackness. A second later, my phone buzzed. "Emergency alert. Chemical spill near South Avenue. Evacuation recommended for sectors 3, B3D. Shelter indoors or report to designated safe locations." Sector 3C. That was us. I stepped out onto the porch. Flashlights flicked on across the street. I could already hear the panic shuffle of feet, doors opening, voices calling out. People didn't wait for instructions. They came straight to the garage. By the time I unlocked the doors, Jerry was already helping Mrs. Avery hobble up the walkway. A young couple with a newborn followed, clutching diapers and a bag of formula. Word spread faster than sirens. The backup generator kicked in, humming steady. Inside, I activated the carbon filter fan Dana insisted we install years ago, one of her checklist items for airborne events. I used to roll my eyes at it. Now I silently thanked her for being smarter than I was. Within 30 minutes, there were over 20 people inside. And then I saw her. Nadine. She was alone, clutching a small white dog wearing that same cream blazer, completely out of place in the moment. She didn't step inside. She hovered at the edge of the driveway, uncertain. I could have let her stay out there. I didn't. I walked to the door and held it open. "You coming in?" I asked. Her eyes darted past me to the cots, the neighbors, the calm. "This doesn't change anything," she said, voice low. "No," I replied, "it just proves everything." She stepped inside without a word. For the next 2 hours we ran as a team. Jenna managed supply check-ins, Jerry organized blankets, a nurse from 2 streets over took vitals for a woman with asthma. No one argued, no one asked if it was sanctioned. It just worked. At one point, the town's emergency services team arrived to inspect. A woman in uniform, badge reading, Takahashi, stood in the doorway, blinking at the order and the flow. "You did this?" she asked. I nodded. She stepped inside, eyes scanning the bins, the filter system, the people. "Then I'm classifying this structure as a temporary emergency operations center, effective immediately." I couldn't help but grin. "You sure that's allowed?" She chuckled. "Let the paperwork catch up." When the chemical alert finally lifted just after midnight, families filed out one by one. Some shook my hand, others gave quick hugs or simple nods. Gratitude didn't need big words tonight. Nadine was the last to leave. She stood near the door for a long time, eyes on Dana's map. "I thought you were building it out of pride," she said. "I was," I replied, "but not mine." She didn't say anything else. He didn't apologize. She just walked into the dark, her little dog padding behind her. Once everyone was gone, I turned off the generator, turned out the lights, and stood in the silence. This garage, this so-called code violation, had just carried more people through crisis than any HOA committee ever had. And tomorrow I was walking into that hearing not with evidence, but with proof. Not on paper, but in memory. I didn't sleep the night before the hearing. I didn't need to. By sunrise, the garage was spotless. Cots folded, lanterns charged, Dana's map freshly laminated and pinned dead center on the wall. The red star hadn't faded. Not after 10 years. Not after storms, citations, or committee threats. If anything, it looked brighter. I arrived at the town hall 15 minutes early. The room was already filling, not just with HOA members, but neighbors, some I hadn't seen in months, some who'd spent the last emergency huddled inside the so-called illegal structure. Nadine wanted gone. At the front table, Nadine sat tall in a beige blazer, a fresh stack of folders in front of her. Her expression was neutral, but the tightness in her jaw betrayed her. I didn't acknowledge her. I didn't need to. The board chair, a man named Lowell Bates, cleared his throat and brought the meeting to order. Tonight's session concerns an appeal filed by Mr. Cal Becker regarding his property structure located at Lot 17B, he said. The board has reviewed the zoning challenge and counter documents. Mr. Becker, you may present. I stood. No theatrics, just a folder in my hands and Dana's memory at my back. I won't bore you with everything again, I began, voice steady. You've seen the zoning files from 1998. You've read the notarized statement from Arthur Keene. You've reviewed the emergency designation map. I held up the petition. 43 residents signed to support reclassifying my garage as a community emergency shelter. Many of them were inside it just 2 nights ago. Murmurs from the room, some heads nodded. One woman clapped once before catching herself. And, I continued, you'll find in your packet a statement from Emergency Services Coordinator Marlene Takahashi, who used her authority to classify the structure as a temporary operations center during the spill. That order remains active. I paused. Now, I could talk about code, about bylaws, about the endless stack of letters, warnings, fines, but instead I'd rather talk about this. I walked to the easel I'd brought with me and flipped the cover sheet. It was a photograph, taken the night of the spill, the garage glowing from within, neighbors huddled together, blankets wrapped around children, a nurse checking vitals in the background. This, I said, tapping the photo, is what you're calling a nuisance. A beat of silence. Then, Jenna stood. I'm on the board, she said, and I want it entered into record that I believe this structure is not only legal, it's necessary. I have audio of previous meetings, including statements made by board members that show personal bias and an intent to retaliate. She didn't look at Nadine when she said it, but the rest of the room did. Lowell blinked. We'll enter the recording into official documentation. Nadine shifted in her seat. This is a distraction. We're here to enforce policy. We're here, I interrupted, to enforce community. And if you think policy is more important than people, you're sitting in the wrong chair. That did it. Applause started from the back, grew, became a wave. People stood. People who had stayed silent now raised their hands. One man shouted, "About time!" Nadine said nothing. She didn't argue. Didn't rebut. She just stared straight ahead, stone-faced, as the sound of her authority unraveling filled the room. Lowell raised his gavel, but didn't strike it. He looked at me, then at the photo, then at the crowd. Motion to recognize Lot 17B as a designated community emergency structure. All in favor? Hands rose. Board members, community members, even one who had never spoken before. Lowell nodded. It passes. The vote passed. No gavel slam, no dramatic speech, just a quiet shift in the room. One of those rare moments where justice doesn't roar. It settles. Jenna sat back in her chair, finally breathing like she'd been holding it for weeks. Nadine stayed perfectly still, staring at a blank spot on the wall as if it might give her an escape route. After the hearing, neighbors clapped me on the back, some shaking hands, others just nodding with a kind of quiet respect. No one called it revenge, they called it right. The next day I received the official letter from the board signed and sealed. The garage was now formally recognized as a community emergency shelter, Lot 17B, protected under municipal guidelines. They couldn't touch it. No fines, no threats, no more folded notices taped to my door. That morning I walked into the garage and just stood there. No lights on, no heater humming, just silence. I reached up and took Dana's laminated map off the wall and held it in my hands like it was something sacred. That red star hadn't moved in over a decade, and somehow through everything, the storms, the board, the hearings, it had stayed untouched, like it knew it had a purpose far beyond ink and paper. Jenna came by around noon, carrying a paintbrush and a can of soft gray paint. I thought maybe we give this place a finish that's less under siege and more community stronghold, she said with a smirk. I nodded. Let's do it. Neighbors trickled in all afternoon. Jerry brought pizza, the Averys donated fresh blankets, and a group of kids painted signs with block letters that read, Becker Shelter, open when never needed. I didn't plan any of it. I didn't have to. As the sun set, we all stood outside the garage. No speeches, no big ceremony, just a shared moment. The light from inside spilled onto the pavement like it had always been meant to reach further than my own doorstep. Nadine wasn't there. Word was, she resigned quietly the next day. No press, no farewell message, just a note to the board citing personal reasons. No one seemed particularly heartbroken. But the space she left behind got filled quickly. Jenna was voted interim president within the week. She didn't hang up banners or make promises. She just went to work. A few days later, I sat on the front porch with Dana's old notepad open on my lap. Most of the pages were full, worn down with time and use, but one corner was still blank. So I picked up a pen and wrote, You were right. They tried, but we were ready. Then I folded it shut, leaned back in my chair, and exhaled for the first time in what felt like years. There's a kind of victory that doesn't need fanfare. It's not loud, it doesn't spike the football, it just stands its ground, unmoved. That garage was never just about wood and concrete. It was about legacy, about being ready when the world decides not to be. And for anyone out there who's ever been told to tear down what they've built just because it makes someone else uncomfortable, don't. Build it anyway. Legacy doesn't need permission. It only needs one person willing to protect it. Have you ever stood your ground against unfair rules or small-minded leaders? Drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from, whether it's a garage, a garden, or a memory. They don't get to take it from you.